Welcome to Open Classroom. It's the Brown Schools Digital Forum for bringing some brilliant people together. And today is no exception. We are so glad that you're here. My name is Laurie McConnell. I'm Communications Coordinator at the Brown School, and I am honored to connect you with the fascinating people that you're going to meet today. I'll introduce some folks in a minute, but first, just a little housekeeping. We're using a webinar format, which means that we can't see or hear you. We wish we could, but we would love to know your thoughts and your questions. Please feel free to put them in the chat. At any time you can ask a question, and we will have a colleague who will be able to ask those questions on the spot. So anytime you have a thought or a question, just put it right on into chat. Also, to let you know, we're streaming live right now on YouTube, and we are also live and in person in Brown Lounge. That's Brown Hall 218. And also there is a reception afterwards in that same room. So if you aren't able to get to Brown Lounge, which is room 218 in Brown Hall right now, you can certainly stop by there after Open Classroom and get to meet our presenter in person. I also want to let you know just really quickly about some future Open Classrooms you might be interested in. This Thursday is part 3 of our Building a Transformative 21st Century Research Agenda series, and we're going to have Dr. Mary McKay detailing collaborative research methods to elevate the voices of youth, adult caregivers, and providers in child and family-focused studies. Then on Wednesday, October 5th, we're going to discuss the Indian Child Welfare Act as it faces scrutiny in the Supreme Court this fall. And then Tuesday, October 11th, we have another in this series, our ICHAD speaker series, exploring digital innovations for those dealing with mental illness. I think our team in Brown Lounge is going to tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. I will share a link in chat to our YouTube channel and also to our Open Classroom page, so you can get all that information and take a look around and register for upcoming webinars and take a look at previous ones. But now to today's program. I just want to let you know some of the people that you're going to see and hear today, starting with Laura Peer, the Associate Director of the International Center for Child Health and Development, ICHAD. Laura is going to be off camera and reading your questions as they come in. So when you hear that beautiful and brilliant voice, that's going to be Laura Peer. I also am very honored to introduce you to Dr. Fred Sewamala, who is the William E. Gordon Distinguished Professor and Associate Dean for Transdisciplinary Faculty Research here at the Brown School. And Dr. Fred, I'm going to give you the pleasure of introducing our presenter and maybe talking a little bit about this speaker series and ICHAD and the reception following and anything else that you would like to share with our viewers today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. This is exciting. It's our first speaker series this semester. And I am Fred Sewamala. I'm on the faculty here at Washington University. But I'm also, I have the honor of directing the International Center for Child Health and Development, ICHAD. But I also direct another center called Smart Africa, which I co-direct with our former dean, who is now Vice Provost Mary McKay. And really, I have the honor to introduce my colleague and a friend and someone that I've worked with for some time. But before I do that, I just need to make a few announcements. One, on October 11th, we have one of our colleagues that we have worked with for some time in Smart Africa. His name is Dr. John Naslundi. And Dr. John will be is an instructor of global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School. So he will be really giving a talk on digital innovation for improving the lives of people living with mental illnesses globally. So we look forward to that. Please join in and do RSVP for that. October 11th, that will be Tuesday from 12:30 to 1:30 p.m. That will be virtual. Then on Wednesday, November 2nd, in partnership with Brown School's Public Health Program Speaker Series, we have our own, who is our associate director, full director, co-director of ICHAD, Dr. Proskovia Nabunya, who is an assistant professor here at Brown School. Will be giving a talk on interventions to address stigma and mental health challenges among children and families in low-resource settings. I am sure that Dr. Nabunya will be talking about her work, her recently funded grant by NIMH, but also her concluding grant also funded by NIMH, which is focused on stigma. Then immediate after here, we have a reception just for the speaker, our speaker, to meet with people who can meet with her in person, but also I'm sure that she'll stay online to communicate with others. She'll give us her email. So without taking a lot of time, I want to introduce Dr. Leyla Karimli. I've known Dr. Leyla Karimli for slightly over maybe 15 years now, or 14 or 15 years. First, we met when, I think when I went to the former Soviet Union in Azerbaijan. She's originally from Azerbaijan. Then we met also in Uganda, where she worked in charge of the, I think they call it the Horn of Africa, working with Oxfam. She was directing that entire region. And then I was able to convince her to apply to Columbia University. And she applied to Columbia University, where I was for 15 years. So she did a PhD at Columbia University under my mentorship. She was my student, and we continue to collaborate as colleagues now. But right now, Dr. Leyla Karimli is an assistant professor of social welfare at UCLA. Of course, she earned a PhD in social welfare from Columbia University. She received a postdoctoral training under my mentorship and Mary McKay's mentorship, both at NYU. And for the year I spent at Chicago, she was also affiliated with Chicago. So she did her postdoc, both at NYU, New York University, but also at the University of Chicago. And then that training was not enough. So she decided to take some time and go to Belgium and undertake another training, postdoc training for several months in an institute called Antwerp Institute for Development Policy and Management. Really, Leyla's work, and I don't want to spend a lot of time. That really, when you look at her work, and you can Google her bio sketch, and you can look at, on the website, University of California in Los Angeles website. But she's very interdisciplinary. She's an interdisciplinary researcher. She examines the link between multidimensional poverty, multi-level social exclusion, and individual-level psychosocial outcomes to inform poverty alleviation programs and policies in the context of both Sub-Saharan Africa and Central Asia. She's widely published in top-tier journals, and so she's going to share with us some of her work. And I don't want to be, the person in between her presentation and you guys receiving a great presentation. So welcome, Dr. Leyla Karimli.
Well, thank you. Let me do this. Thank you very much for welcoming me here. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here. And thank you for coming. And thank you to all those who joined online. I hope my screen is okay. Yeah, okay. So I'll just go straight to my presentation. So today's presentation is about, touches upon can you hear me well? Yeah, so it's loud enough. Okay, so today's presentation touches upon a part of my research where I examine pathways through which poverty reduction or economic strengthening interventions affect psychosocial outcomes for children and adolescents in low-income settings. So I will be using poverty reduction and economic strengthening interchangeably on this presentation, and I will start with reiterating something that all of you probably know, right, that there's a very well-documented argument about poverty being a risk factor for child development and well-being. There is a plethora of research that shows that children who grew up in poverty demonstrate fewer psychosocial competencies, such as self-esteem and self-efficacy. They are more likely to suffer from poor mental health outcomes, including internalizing disorders, such as depression and anxiety, as well as externalizing disorders such as maladaptive behavior and conduct problems. Children who grow up in poverty are more likely to be exposed to abuse, physical, sexual, and psychological violence at both family and community level. I do want to mention that it does not mean that children in families with higher socioeconomic status are not exposed to abuse and violence, but poverty significantly increases the likelihood of child's exposure to these adverse experiences. And children who live in poverty also are significantly more vulnerable to being exploited, exposed to hazardous work, hazardous labor, which means that they are forced to work long hours in a hazardous environment using dangerous tools and pesticides that are detrimental to their health and development. So this is all very well documented. There's a plethora of research. I just want us to start with this acknowledgement, and I will pause here for a minute, and I really want to emphasize that these statements are not meant to and shall not be used to stigmatize poor people, right? This is not about stigmatizing poor people. On the contrary, these findings clearly demonstrate the detrimental effect of poverty and deprivation on human lives. And I do believe that there's absolutely nothing intrinsic about this phenomena, meaning poverty can and must be reduced or possibly alleviated, and if we're serious about improving people's lives, right? So acknowledging how detrimental poverty is and acknowledging its detrimental effect on a range of child outcomes, variety of poverty reduction interventions and programs are offered across the globe, including in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is the focus of my research. And I also focus on specifically on child and adolescent outcomes, although there are outcomes at adult level as well. So interventions, poverty reduction interventions, they really vary in form and shape. These interventions sometimes take form of cash transfers. Those cash transfers provide cash to families either unconditionally or conditional upon meeting specific predetermined criteria, right? They're called conditional cash transfers, and those predetermined criteria could be, for example, enrolling children at school, regular visits to pediatrician, and so on. Those poverty reduction interventions can also take form of cash plus programs that are combining cash or asset transfers. Occasionally, they also include in-kind transfers. And there's a combination of asset or cash transfer with additional service components or linkage to social services. And there are also well-known and well-examined microcredit programs that offer financial services to low-income households living in poverty. There are formal and informal savings programs that aim to support poor households in their efforts to build assets and maintain sufficient livelihoods that goes above and beyond mere relief from deprivation. So all these are different types of poverty reduction programs and interventions that are implemented across the globe, and some of them specifically aim at improving child well-being, defined in the most general terms. Now, the question is, what do we know about those poverty reduction interventions, right? So they've been examined extensively to understand the range of outcomes. And in general, with a very broad stroke, these interventions were often found to significantly improve child physical and mental health, child educational outcomes, and nutrition. And there are most recent studies that show some positive effect on of these interventions in terms of reducing multidimensional child deprivations. In some instances, in some instances, there is an evidence of positive effect of these interventions on reducing exposure to hazardous work, harmful for child's health. So the story is not that linear. So there's a very non-trivial evidence that these positive effects on all the outcomes that you see on your screen, that these positive effects are not homogeneous, right? They're not. So the relationship is not linear. This positive effects are either very heterogeneous, which means that they vary based on outcome, right? So for example, some of the most recent systematic reviews, they find a positive effect of poverty reduction interventions on some of the externalizing symptoms, but not on internalizing symptoms. And so it really depends by, for example, on the health symptom, and whether it's internalizing or externalizing, and within those subcategories as well. Or for example, in terms of educational outcomes, it really depends on whether we're looking into just an enrollment or we're looking into academic achievements and learning outcomes. In terms of nutrition, also the effect varies based on whether we're looking into stunting, wasting, height for age, or weight for age scores, and so on. So the effect varies across different outcomes. The effect also varies across programs. Specific program characteristics do matter, and some program characteristics were found to be more efficient than some others, right? So this is a very general picture, just to introduce us all into this debate about effect of poverty reduction interventions taken in general, defined in very general terms, on child psychosocial outcomes. Now, what is very interesting in terms of effect of these interventions on child labor, specifically hazardous labor, findings are particularly contradictory, because, for example, one of the most recent systematic reviews that was, if I'm not mistaken, it was conducted in 2020, it found that only a third of the reviewed studies show the positive effect of poverty reduction interventions on reducing the child exposure to hazardous labor. Only a third, right? Another third actually shows the negative effect, meaning children families participating in these interventions are actually have increased, they report increased hours of work, they report increased exposure to hazardous labor, and so on and so forth. So, and another third shows no effect, right? So you see that it's the conversation is very non-linear. And some of the most recent systematic reviews and meta-analysis and some of the studies, they actually emphasize the underlying, the importance of underlying structures and processes, such as, for example, family structure, family composition, gender norms within the family, gender norms in the community, power dynamic within the in the intra-household decision making, or power dynamic within the community, family relations. These are all important factors that has to be taken into account, has to be considered, and preferably has to be incorporated if we want to design efficient poverty reduction interventions. Now, given all this evidence, if there's only one thing that we can be certain of, is that the phenomena, there's a supreme complexity of phenomena. It's a very complex phenomena, and this complexity requires understanding not only whether there are effects, yes, no, but also how these effects are transmitted, how exactly poverty reduction interventions are affecting child psychosocial well-being. And this is what I will be talking today. I'm presenting a small section of my effort to tackle this question. So today's presentation is about a specific type of economic strengthening or poverty reduction program that offers child savings accounts to HIV/AIDS orphans in Southern Uganda. And I will focus on presenting my findings from two studies that were both designed and implemented by Brown School's very own ICHAD. I think everyone in this room is from ICHAD, almost. The international, for viewers online, ICHAD is the International Center for Child Health and Development, and both studies are designed, implemented, and led by the team that is led and trained by Professor Fred Siromala, and who is a principal investigator in the studies. And both studies are funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. So both studies are cluster randomized controlled trials. Randomization was conducted at the village level, and treatment group participants are offered an intervention which is bundled. And that bundle consists of three main components that you see on your screen. First component is matched savings accounts, which you see child development accounts. So these matched saving accounts are open in a recognized financial institution, in the mainstream institution under child's name. And accumulated savings in these accounts are matched with money from the program. So in Subi Maka, the matching rate was 1-on-1. In Bridges to the Future, which is the second study, there's a variation in matching. One treatment group receives ratio 1-on-1, another one receives ratio 2-to-1. And these matched accounts are intended to pay for child's post-primary education or start a micro enterprise business. Second component of this intervention is financial literacy training, which includes sessions on savings and microenterprise development. And the third component of that bundled intervention is mentorship, which is guided by a 9-session curriculum. And this mentorship program is intended to help participants to develop the ability to identify specific future goals and educational aspirations. Now, these both studies are informed by asset-based approach and asset theory, which is developed also by Brown School's very own Professor Michael Sheridan. According to this theory, building assets, although important for buffering economic hardships and reducing vulnerability to shocks, produces not only economic benefits and inclusion to financial institutions. These are important, but the effect is not just that. What is important for the research that I'm interested in, that the theory claims that asset accumulation is believed to have important developmental and psychosocial benefits, such as, for example, reduced depression, improved future orientation, empowerment, and so on. Now, I suggest to pause for a minute and pay attention to an interesting theoretical distinction that is made by some scholars, and they talk about the existential effect of assets versus social identity effect of assets. Existential effect of assets is the way in which asset ownership might transform an individual's sense of self, irrespective of how others perceive it. And social identity effect is the effect that asset ownership may have on our perceptions of social acceptance, the way others regard us. So if I have more assets, then perhaps I'm more respected, and so on. Excuse me. Another interesting distinction, also theoretical distinction that I find very interesting, is the distinction between instrumental effects of assets and intrinsic effects of assets. Instrumental effects is about opportunities that come with asset ownership. So here the question is, what assets can help us to achieve? Right? What assets allows us to do? Intrinsic effect of assets is the effects that are achieved only by asset ownership. And the question here is not what assets do to individuals, but what assets, the question here is what assets do to individuals, not what assets can do for us. This is the distinction. And This distinction will be further explored in the research that I'm presenting. So I decided to test this theoretical propositions by asking several consecutive questions using data from Subimaka study and Bridges to the Future study. Now, my question number one was, to what extent does accumulation of financial assets mediate the effect of bundled intervention on psychosocial outcomes? So I was curious whether the effect of bundled intervention is transmitted through actual saving. Does it make a difference whether participants in the treatment group save and the amount that they save? Does it make the difference in terms of transmitting the effect of intervention on child psychosocial outcomes? Now, do study participants exhibit greater future orientation because they accumulate assets? Because this is what's claimed by the theory, right? The asset accumulation leads to greater future orientation. Now, my question is, does it really happen? Can we see that in the data set that we have? And the data set was quite wonderful because I used Subimaka data set, and in Subimaka we had data collected from both children and their caregivers over the course of 3 years within the randomized control trial. I had information about savings reported by children as well as savings reported by guardians, right? So what I did is I looked into guardian self-reported savings and child self-reported savings as mediators, trying to understand whether they do mediate the effect of intervention on the outcomes related to future orientation, such as hopelessness, self-concept, confidence in educational plans, and educational expectations. So what the mediators that you see on your screen, guardian self-reported savings and child self-reported savings, I had for each group, guardians and children, I had 2 different mediators, 2 different measures. One was binary saved, yes, no, and another one was reported amount saved. So what I found is that the mediators tested in this particular study, they do not transmit the effect of intervention on the outcomes. In other words, I found that participation in matched child savings programs improved adolescent future orientation and psychosocial outcomes regardless of saving. The asset accumulation opportunity produced positive effects on adolescents' future orientation and psychosocial outcomes regardless of the amount saved by participants, which is very interesting. The biggest limitation of this study is that we were using self-reported measures of savings. And we had to use self-reported measures versus administrative measures because administrative savings measures were available only for treatment group participants. And in order to test the effect of intervention, we needed it also for control group. And so we had self-reported savings for both treatment and control group. But yes, this is the limitation. However, what I did is just, for the robustness check, I did some bivariate analysis to see whether self-reported savings correlate with administrative savings, and I found strong correlation. So that kind of added to a little bit to the confidence about the results. Now, after I found this, and this has been published in the Journal of Adolescent Health, then the next question was, whether the bundled intervention affects child mental health by reducing child poverty and child work, and by increasing household wealth, right? Because this is one of the general theoretical assumptions that that asset accumulation has an effect that is very specific to assets, and it could be independent from income. So to answer this question, again, I ran mediation analysis where I looked into child poverty, child work, and household wealth as mediators. And I had a latent outcome, which combined Beck hopelessness scale, Tennessee self-concept scale, and child depression inventory into one latent outcome. And to measure household wealth, I used the household wealth index adapted from demographic health survey. That measure was tested in more than 90 developing countries, and we just replicated this method in constructing the household wealth index. To measure child poverty, we had some interesting questions. More specifically, we had 6 binary measures, variables that were indicating whether the child has more than 2 sets of clothes, a blanket, at least 2 pairs of shoes, has a meat fish at least once in the last, had meat or fish at least once in the last week, had 3 meals per day in the last 7 days, and had tea with sugar at least once in the last 7 days. Now, these questions were adapted to the context of our study, and they were adapted from DHS questionnaire and Uganda Bureau of Statistics household survey. And finally, the child work was a rather simple measure. It was naive and simplistic measure of of the frequency of child's work, measured as never, once in a while, almost every week, few days a week, and almost every day, right? So yes, it is simplistic, but this is what was available in the data set, and I was curious to see if I find anything on that measure as well. Now, the graphs look very non-attractive, but the reason, and they're probably hard to read, but the reason why I put those graphs, because I do find them attractive, and because I believe they show the complexity of the analysis, but more importantly, complexity of the phenomena, right? So we are looking into many dimensions all at once, trying to understand relations between them, and intersections. Now, what did we find? We found the strongest evidence for mediation of the intervention effect by child poverty. So I'll just move to finding. So the strongest effect for mediation was found by child poverty, which means that participation, that the effect of intervention on children's mental health could have possibly occurred through reductions in specifically child poverty, right? And it's very important to emphasize because there is also a growing body of research that shows and documents how poverty is experienced differently by adults and children, even within the same household. So it's important to focus on specifically child poverty versus the household poverty. And interestingly, participation in intervention improved child's mental health, regardless its impact on household wealth. So household wealth we did not find any significant mediation effect by household wealth, right? But we did find some suggestion that child poverty could partially mediate the effect of intervention on our outcomes. So this finding again emphasizes the importance of understanding child poverty differently from adults. It also suggested poverty reduction programs that aim solely to improve household income versus focusing specifically on child poverty. They might be less advantageous to child mental health. as compared to those that are specifically targeted towards reducing the impact of poverty on children. And the final set of slides is the third set of questions. So, okay, I tested whether the amount of saving mediates, it doesn't. I tested whether the the reduction of household poverty as proxied by household wealth, does it mediate the effect? No, it doesn't. Child poverty perhaps does. So intervention could potentially affect, improve child mental health because it reduces child poverty. Now the final question is, what about the family support? And to what extent does family support mediate the effect of poverty reduction intervention on children and adolescent mental health functioning? And this question comes from a well-developed theoretical framework that links financial stress, parental stress, links poverty to parental stress, and then parental stress to parental behaviors and attitudes, and consequently that leads to detrimental effect on child mental health, right? So informed by that theoretical framework, I'm testing whether family support is a pathway through which this particular intervention affects child and adolescent mental health functioning. So again, I'm doing mediation analysis. Now I'm looking into a latent mediator that combines 4 indicators: family cohesion, frequency of family communication, child caregiver relationship, and perceived caregiver support. And I'm running analysis for each of the outcomes separately. So I have a latent mediator, and I have 3 different outcomes: child's self-depression inventory, self-concept scale reported by child, and hopelessness scale also reported by child. And so I'm presenting these results in form of a table, but this is what we're looking into. So we're looking to understand what happens in our analysis, what happens to the indirect effect. Indirect effect is the treatment effect of mediator and the mediator effect on outcome, and what happens to the direct effect between the intervention and the outcome. And this is what we find. So the analysis will run for 3 different follow-ups: for 24-month follow-up, for 36-month follow-up, and this is a mistake, sorry, for 48-month follow-up, because Bridges to the Future gives us the luxury of looking into relatively large sample size collected within the randomized control trial over the course of 5 years. Right, so that's why I have this privilege of looking into effect over the course of several follow-ups. And what we found is that we found a very strong evidence that family relationship and family support either partially or fully mediate the effect of family-based poverty reduction intervention. In this particular case, we're talking about a very particular form of intervention, which is child savings accounts. So it mediates partially or fully the effect of this intervention on children and adolescents' mental health functioning, specifically depression, hopelessness, and self-concept. So these findings emphasize the importance of relational factors, such as quality of family relationships, family support, as pathways between poverty and child mental health. And it supports the argument that quality of family relationship and family support as a specific form of social support can be an important adaptive resource and protective factor, strengthening child and adolescent resilience and reduce the effect of poverty on child mental health. So I will stop here, and I would love to engage in conversation and questions, and I would love to hear your feedback about these findings, one conclusion that I can draw from all these findings is, why am I looking into pathways? Because as mentioned earlier, the argument that I was trying to make is about the complexity of the phenomena. And I am a great believer in systems approach and approaching the problem of child and adolescent psychosocial functioning from different dimensions. And I do believe that poverty reduction programs that focus, that do not take into account variety of institutional and structural barriers to child well-being, they will not be as efficient as the integrated ones, right? So I think this could be the one overly simplified conclusion that I could possibly make. So I'll stop the screen share. Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Dr. Leyla. I have a question I have is in regards to what you just said last. So could you help us understand, at least help me understand, the difference between pathways and combination interventions? So because the way you explained it, it looks like you believe that you need to take into account the different combinations if you are going to address issues of poverty. But why wouldn't you think about it in terms of what does this combination intervention that has a saving as an institution, a training, why wouldn't you look at it as a combination by itself and say it has direct effects, but think about it in terms of pathways and which path? So I just wanted to hear more about the distinction between pathways and combination.
I believe pathways is, thank you for the question, Professor. So I believe pathways is more about specific mechanisms through which intervention works. And if we understand specific mechanism through which the intervention works or it doesn't work, then I believe that we can build it a little more targeted versus, so it's not about adding different components and applying it to recipients, treating them all, as homogeneous body of recipients. I think it's about understanding what needs to be more targeted. For example, if the pathway for poverty reduction program, and again, because of the complexity, there will be no one single, I don't think there is one single pathway to say that, oh, the pathway from, let's say, from poverty to child's mental health is only, let's say, family strengthening. So let's do family strengthening, because by doing that, we are going to improve child well-being, right? So we are not, but the pathway shows us the mechanism through which the intervention is working. It helps us not only, it helps us to fine-tune the theory, the theoretical background, the conceptual understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it. But I also believe that it also helps, it can be translated into implementation research by fine-tuning, targeting specific conditions, instead of combining it for everyone. I know that you have this most recent study which uses the most methodology where you're looking into specific combination, not just one combination, but maybe each subsample can benefit from different combination of those factors. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Are you
We just want to make sure that the people
in the chat. Yeah, I'll read this one from Mary Bunn. Can you say more about how the current program incorporates a focus on family relationships and family support? And how will these findings inform the savings program moving forward?
let me. how the current program incorporates family support? That's a great question. So, and all the ICHAD people that are present in this room, they probably have much more information about it because they are in the field and, you know, they work with participants and field and data collection and so on. But to the best of my understanding, in the studies that I'm presenting, which is Subimaka and Bridges, there was not a specific family strengthening component, which is now being implemented in other studies that are launched by ICHAD. So I know that there are other studies that are currently administered and implemented by ICHAD, where they're combining child savings accounts and specific type of the family strengthening component. So this was not the case with Subimaka and Bridges, but they called it family based because it was we don't just work with children, it's children and the caregivers, and caregivers are involved into activities. So the question is, who saves for children? These are the caregivers who save for children, right? Mostly it's not it's not the children themselves who save for themselves, or even though sometimes it happens because they have some gifts, because sometimes they work and, you know, they have money, but it's mostly caregivers or extended family, aunts, uncles, grandfathers, grandmothers, friends of the family who are saving. So this is the way how the intervention is involving, this is my understanding of, this is the way how intervention is involving family in general. And in the financial training, in Subimaka, for sure, financial training was including not just children, but also caregivers. So intervention activity, the treatment, right, is received not by just by children, even though child savings accounts are meant predominantly for children, but the treatment, the other components such as specifically financial training is received also by caregivers. So this is the way how caregivers and the whole family is involved into this intervention. But if you're asking whether there is a specific, you know, family coaching, family strengthening component, this was not the case in Subimaka and Bridges, but they are, to the best of my knowledge, they are incorporating that particular standalone, and they're testing the effect of it in other studies. Go ahead, please.
It's amazing. Very, I'm happy that I was able to join the session. You may have mentioned it at the beginning, but so parents had to initially put money in the account for the program to match it, or they could have participated with zero contribution to the saving account. And I also have a second question that I can ask later.
So again, we have room full of ICHAD people and researchers and scholars who know much more about that. So seeding accounts means that there was to open up an account, right? Most of the financial institutions, they are charging the fee, and that fee was either waived or it was offered by the bank itself, and that was part of the conversation between the team, research team, and implementing agencies, specifically banks. But so the matching happens when there is a deposit. If there is no deposit, there is nothing to match.
The family.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I can ask my second question. So I'm an economist, and I'm a big fan of multidimensional poverty. When we are looking at poverty, looking at multidimensional poverty instead of just income and assets. And I think for the child poverty, that's what had happened, because you named indicators that are not necessarily looking at exact money. I just wanted to clarify that, like, when you're referring to poverty, it's just like income level below the national poverty line of that country, or it's multidimensional looking at other aspects of life? Because you mentioned eating fish.
That's a great question. That's a great conceptual question. So I did not develop the proper multidimensional measure of child poverty for this particular study. Although there is a publication out of Bridges that looks specifically into that. But I was using specific indicators that talk about the experience of poverty, so which is not about whether the child has money, whether it talks about, you're absolutely right, it talks about whether the child has, you know, basic food and basic needs covered. But I wouldn't dare to call it a multidimensional measure of poverty, because I didn't really calculate, you know, the dimensions and create the proper multidimensional measure. It was just a composite score that combines those 6 binary items in an effort to understand how child experienced poverty. And this was borrowed, as I mentioned, from, you know, the DHS and Uganda Bureau of Statistics. So it seemed to be a measure that is contextually has been tested and worked, helped us to get at least some understanding. Yeah, but thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I'm a great fan of the concept of multidimensional deprivations.
Thank you. We have a question from Gretchen online. Can you talk about whether the different components of these interventions were additive, or if any were not significantly contributive?
Different components were all offered at once. So everyone in the treatment group received all of those different components. They were not, and I can't really, so because they're all offered to treatment group participants, I can't really test specific effect of each of the components. So I'm doing my best to kind of tease out, I did my best to tease out the information about actual saving, right? But I wouldn't call it specifically testing one particular component. Does that answer the question? Let me see. If
She says, thank you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. That was great. I have a question about if you checked or see any differences by children's age and gender?
Oh, that's a great question. Huh?
In your model, I saw these variables in Bridges when you have like complicated mediation model.
So
yes, here. So
I was controlling for age, and I was controlling for in this particular model, I was controlling for child's age, gender, and orphanhood status. I have to look into what I found specifically in terms of age, but the findings were not significant enough, and that's why we're not really talking about them, because the age, so it was a continuous variable of age. We didn't really look into specific subcategories of age, even though that could have been probably conceptually important, because child's developmental outcomes will vary by within specific categories of age, but we didn't do that. It was a simply controlling for child's age taken as a continuous variable. And I do not remember if anything was conceptually important enough. I don't think so.
We always like to incorporate this question into speaker series when we have the chance, because as you know, ICHAD has many active research studies, but also research training programs. And we did have a question. So we have some early career researchers and students in the audience. So someone is asking, what made you choose to focus on this work, and what has surprised you most in your research findings?
What made me choose this work? That's a great question. So I have to be very honest, when I came to the PhD program, I had a completely different idea for my research. I was more interested in macro level effect of decentralization, and and that was fed by I was driven by the experience that I had prior to joining PhD program. But after I joined the PhD program, I immediately started working with Professor Sivamala. And he was doing this study and originally when I joined into a program in 2008, I think he was doing the original study, the smaller study, SUBI. And I was really mesmerized by, the complexity of it, but also by, I have to be honest, I also was driven to this by his willingness to let me incorporate some of the questions that I was interested in, such as, poverty related questions, social capital related questions into the study. So that's what really helped me to get more involved into the study as he was designing Subimaka and getting a proposal ready. So I was able to incorporate some of my own questions into the study, which was very generous, and not many, for junior scholars, it's not everybody would be that generous with that. So and I also really needed it, and I miss it a lot in my current research, that to be in touch with the field. And while I was working with Professor Sumala, I would travel to Uganda. Even though I was in PhD program, I would go to Uganda at least twice a year. And it wasn't just a research, it was research that was informed by the field, for the field, with the sense of impact, with the sense that we're doing something that hopefully has a impact on people's lives. And that was also something very important for me, and drew me further and further into this research. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does. Thank you. So the follow-up to that is then, I think this might be our time for our very last question. What advice would you give then, based on your experiences, to master's degree and early PhD students right now?
My advice would be, this is something that, again, came from my own learning, working with a team, that if you do something that you are very passionate about, and if you do something that you truly believe in, it stops being a work, it becomes your passion. And because it's no longer just a work, it's your passion, your life becomes much more meaningful and much easier to live. And the work becomes much, so you work hard without feeling exhausted because you're driven by the passion. So that would be, it's not really an advice. I don't like giving advices. It's more of a wish, I really wish everyone in their pursuit of education and research, I think the best thing that I can wish anyone is to find your true passion. Because if you're following your passion, and if your research is either about something you really, really care about, or about someone you really, really care about, then it becomes much more meaningful. That would be my wish, not advice.
Excellent way to wrap this up. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Laurie with Open Classroom to sign us off. And I'll just say, since my voice is going now, to please join us in Brown Lounge to meet Dr. Leyla if you.
Somehow we lost Laura's voice, but yes, please go to Brown Lounge starting right now for a reception to meet Dr. Leyla. Dr. Leyla, this was amazing. Not only are you brilliant, but your passion comes through. And I just want to thank you so much for doing this important work. Thank you to Dr. Simamala for being an inspiration to you and to so many students, and for doing the great work that he does. Thank you to Laura Peer and everyone at the International Center for Child Health and Development, ICHAD. If you go to the reception, you can meet so many of them. So thank you to you too for joining us for this open classroom. It really means a lot to us that you can come and have these great conversations and ask these questions. This community is very dear to us, and whenever we can have conversations with you, we are certainly grateful. And speaking of grateful, we must say thank you to Braden, who worked some IT miracles today at the very last minute. Braden at the Brown School here at Washington University, we owe you a great debt. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the reception. We are so glad that you spent time with us. Bye-bye.